Um, Greetings, everyone. So my name is Mark Carolan. I am a transformational life executive and business coach. I'm also a public speaking coach, and I'm twice Toastmasters national champion and a TEDx speaker. And the reason why I believe I'm here today to talk about this authenticity in business and in life is because this is a journey that I've been on and a journey that I've learned an awful lot from. And it's also, I suppose, kind of what I was asked to do a TED Talk about over a year ago. My TED Talk was titled The Magic of Being Yourself. And it's kind of a journey to that space. And I don't know if we ever fully get there because there's always a bit of ourselves that we're learning and growing and learning through all the time. But I also think it is the journey we're supposed to be on. And there's a big difference in what people think of these days as speaking your mind as opposed to being authentic. And I think that's a very, very important difference. And I know with a lot of Americans on the call here, I know you see a lot of speaking your mind in American politics, and people are like, well, what does that really mean? But I think there's a big difference in being authentic, is because then you've done the work and you're speaking from a good place as opposed to a place of ego or a place of arrogance or a place of wherever else that is coming from. To give you a little bit of background to myself, I worked in the corporate world for over 20 years. To go further back, I'm actually a shopkeeper by trade. My family were shopkeepers, and that's where I learned my grounding. I would still argue to this day that the best job I ever, or the most important job I ever had, was becoming a shopkeeper at the age of about 6 years old, because it was a small little shop in the middle of the country. And it taught me how to speak to people. It taught me how to greet people, how to say hello, how to ask people how they are, how to listen to people, how to listen to their response, because it was a country shop. So you had to treat everyone in a very respectful and a certain way, because they were all neighbors as they were. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist anymore because our modern world and commerce doesn't have space for a lot of these little country places anymore. And when I say a country shop, like, I mean, it was probably about 10 foot by 10 foot square, and it stored everything. Whatever you needed existed in that space. I mean, from broom handles to nails to butter to milk to bread. We even had to weigh out stuff. If you wanted certain things, we'd weigh out everything out on a weighing scale. So that's how far back it goes. But it was a good grounding in my life. And when I eventually got out of that and got through university, I ended up in the corporate world. And even though after a week in the corporate world, I knew it wasn't for me, I managed to last there 21 years, which it's a testament to my ignorance and my resilience at the same time. So I eventually got out. I left at the senior management level in a large financial institution that I was in, and I left because it was time, because I needed to go and explore another world for myself. Because while I enjoyed parts of what I was doing, I loved the people part, I loved the development of people part, I knew that I needed to explore this part for myself and see how I could serve people in a different way. And that's how I found myself into this coaching and public speaking space. And welcome, Gary.
Hello, hi everyone. Sorry, I'm a bit late. I had a doctor's appointment that they couldn't give me. They had to give me today or 3 weeks' time, so I had to take it today. Sorry, Jackie. Thank you very much. Hi everyone.
Hey Gary, how you doing?
Hello. So I'll leave you all to it. I'm sorry I can't join for the rest of the webinar, but it was a pleasure meeting you all. Enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Same here.
I was just giving an introduction to myself there, Gary.
Okay.
I kicked off only a couple of minutes ago, just kind of telling people how I found my way into the space that I work in now, as an introduction, how I found my way through shopkeeping, through the corporate world, into becoming a coach and a public speaker.
Okay. Today's topic is being authentic in communication. Okay. And the reason I invited Mark, because Mark is twice Toastmasters public speaking champion. And so the reason I invited him was to get some insights about communication, how communication is not just verbal, but it's all about space, silence, gestures, and so on. And as Mark has had this success, I'd like him to share with us some ways we can actually communicate in a better way, because that's what it's all about. It's about connecting to people, not head to head, but maybe heart to heart. And so that was the reason. So Mark, maybe you can just give us a little bit of, like, you just introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about how we can be authentic in our communication and install a little bit deeper relationships?
Absolutely, Gary. So communication is such an interesting topic, isn't it? We don't realize that we're communicating every single moment. Anytime we're with someone, we're communicating through our words. We communicate, but through our language, through how we hold ourselves, through how we, even through what way we present to someone and how we hold their gaze, we're communicating all the time. One of the greatest communication tools we have is a simple smile. Like, it's such an amazing tool. I work with somebody and she's a brilliant speaker, brilliant at training people in public speaking, but she has to tell herself to smile because she forgets to smile all the time, and she records herself back. Goes, "Oh God." And the difference when you smile to how people feel and how you make people relax is incredible. It's so important. And I know, David, you like to crack a joke here and there, and that helps alleviate a situation an awful lot. And that's a very good way of communication. But communication, we overcomplicate communication. And a lot of the reason why we overcomplicate communication is because we're trying to communicate externally, but we're focused internally. We're thinking about ourselves. We're thinking about how we are. We're thinking about the fact that we're nervous. We're thinking about how we're going to be perceived. We're thinking about all these things rather than focus externally on the person we're communicating with. How do we want them to perceive us? How do we want them to feel? Because an awful lot of it, communication, is how you make somebody feel. So how do you...
I just got a question here, Mark. If you were
Yeah.
communicating now, like as you are, and you were to turn off your TV the camera, the computer camera, would you communicate in a better way? Just a question.
That's a good question. I would say that, yeah, I would use my voice an awful lot more. You obviously don't have a visual at that point, so I would be much more using my tone and building my tone up if I thought I wanted to say something really important, and maybe lowering it down where it's not necessary. So I would use an awful lot of tone because people can hear, you know, the way you listen to someone. I love listening to On Being with Krista Tippett. I don't know if anyone knows that particular, it's a US podcast. And you can hear the smile in her voice as she's speaking. You can hear it. And you're not watching her face, you don't see her face, but you can hear the smile in her voice. And that's a really strong way of communicating. You know, we listen to so many podcasts and stuff these days, and you can create so much with just that voice by using your voice in certain ways and using it in the right way if you can't see. And so it would be slightly different. I wouldn't be hugely different, because when we talk about authenticity, you still need to bring yourself to it. And the more authentic you are, then you kind of speak in a similar way, whether you're on video or off video, because this is who you are and how you present. Now, if you're being recorded or if you're on a TV show or something, you're going to communicate a little bit different. It could be exaggerated in a different way because you're trying to make a point. But the essence of you should still be in there, should still be coming true.
Do we want to try? You want to turn off your camera for 2 seconds and just say something to us and see what it's like? Maybe something funny or something serious, and let's see how you come across.
What's interesting now is that now gives me the liberty to stand up, because while I might have a t-shirt with a collar on, I'm also wearing a pair of shorts because I am on Zoom, and we all look different when we stand up as opposed to how we sit down.
Yeah,
so There's an interesting thing in this too, right? There's a liberty. I now have much more liberty to say and do what I want because I can't be seen. There's a freedom in what I can do now, even though I'm not really going to change how I present, but I suddenly have a freedom because you cannot see me and I can see you, which is a little bit voyeuristic as well. It's a bit Big Brother here.
So what do you mean you can do something that, I explain that a little bit better, Mark? What you can do things that, because we can't see you. What do you mean? What can?
Well, I'm just saying there's a liberty in suddenly you can't be seen. When we can be seen, and all of us, and this is where our problem with being authentic is, we feel we need to perform. We need to be on because we can be seen, we can be observed, we can be judged. And a lot of the reason why we struggle with authenticity is because we're afraid of being judged an awful lot of the time. We're trying to portray a certain image and we don't want to be challenged on that. We don't want to be shamed on that. Whereas when I can't be seen here, the judgment is completely different because I know no one can see me. So all you can judge is the voice that I'm using, is how I sound, the words that I say, but not in the same way. So you can't judge my appearance. And there's a freedom in not having your appearance judged.
Are you able to communicate? Sorry, Steve, just last question, and I'll give it over to Steve. Are you able to communicate more? I mean, less? Do you feel you're a little bit restricted with your communication now?
No, I don't really, because I'm still just talking. So for me, okay, as I'm communicating now, my screen is, I have whoever's speaking. I don't have myself front and center on the screen, so I can't see myself anyway. So it doesn't really impact me per se, but I think it really can impact. If I'll use a musician as an example. Any Pearl Jam fans in the house? No, they were of a certain vintage, probably going back to early 90s Seattle grunge time. And Eddie Vedder was the lead singer. And for the first year or two as the lead singer of Pearl Jam, he used to turn his back to the audience and
Cool.
sing because he was so nervous as a singer, he wasn't fit to face the audience. So it gave him liberty to be able to perform by having his back to the singer. So he couldn't be seen doing it. I've
Wow.
got him back to the audience until he built the confidence that I can sing, I can do this. And then now he's a proper showman and he's demonstrates and demonstrable on stage. But for a lot of people, where there's a confidence thing, it's like I said earlier, where you're thinking about yourself in your communication, you're thinking about yourself rather than who you're trying to communicate with. And when you are in that space, if being seen can really heighten that fear of the judgment, because you're become conscious of, oh, people can see how I look, what I'm doing, and maybe you're not comfortable with your hands and that kind of piece. It also can remove quality of communication because we communicate with our eyes, we communicate with our hands, and I know I do quite a lot. I would use my hands quite a lot in speaking, so you lose that aspect of your ability to communicate.
Steve's got his hand up. Steve, you got an insight question? Hi, Steve.
So thank you. I love the topic, Mark. Feel free to turn your camera back on, unless you're walking around. And I agree with you because the difference between like the LinkedIn audio events or the Clubhouse events where it's audio only, it does offer a lot of freedom because it's people can participate and still do other tasks, right? So they're not actually fully present. If you're on video, you need to be fully present. I loved what you shared about the smile because what comes to me is it's this idea of our we have this deep desire need for connection with others, and there's this magic that happens when we have true authentic connection with others. And I just wanted to share, everything that you're saying is interesting, and I'll give you a question after. But one of the things that really impacted me was Simon Sinek, and I'll use this as an example. Pretend this is a phone. When somebody's on their phone and they're talking, if I were, just talking to you, but looking at my phone like this, it actually creates a disconnect, right? Because now the most important thing in the room is not you, it's this device, it's this phone. And so every time we pull a phone out, we're actually separating ourselves from that basic human need of connection. And it's fascinating, and it's like I've noticed it now. It's like now once you become aware of it, you realize it. And so many people do this. I actually was trying to show a picture to somebody at a party, and I pulled out my phone to show the picture, trying to have this connection. And by me doing that, everyone else pulled out their phones, right? Once you break the seal and make it okay to bring technology out in a social setting, then everyone does it. And I noticed that the dialogue went from people engaging and smiling and connecting to now everyone was on their social media. And it was just an interesting thing to learn. So my question to you is, because a smile was like the most important thing when I was seeking connection and going through like a difficult time in my life and realizing that there is great beauty behind that connection. What was the thing that happened to you that took you down this path of understanding of looking at connection and communication and all of that? Was there some event that happened in your life that elevated this to your awareness? Because there is some quieting of the ego or death of the ego or something that happens that opens up this realization.
Oh,
So
wow. That's a big question. Gary, I hope we've got a couple of hours here until we dive into this question. And I think nothing happened per se, Stephen, except a yearning, a constant search for something. I think if I go right back to my origins, and I tell a lot of stories that it's amazing how much now, as I look at my life, how much of the questions I've been answering, I kind of, or it was asked very young, or I asked myself very young, but either ignored the question, went off in that world of getting paid and enjoying a good life, or went off and did all these things to ignore certain questions, but those questions are the ones that keep coming back and come back and need to be answered. And I think for me, I went on a search for answers, and to go right back, I think I was probably about 7 or 8, and I remember this very well. Growing up in Ireland, so it would have been a very Catholic country at the time, and my father would have brought us all, everyone sat into the car on a Sunday and driven to mass. And the priest would stand and he would give his sermon, and we'd get back into the car on the way home. I'd be in the car on the way home, and I would be sitting there dissecting the sermon and go, what do you think he meant by this? I find that a bit arrogant. I was taking this sermon apart. And one day my father turns around to me and just goes, oh, would you just shut up? And my father, now, in fairness to my father, like, he is my hero. He was an incredible man. Like, the amount I've learned from him since he passed away 20 years ago was extraordinary in how he carried himself. But he was just frustrated by me asking all these questions, because it dawned on me that nobody else was actually listening. People were just there for their own peace, for their own solace, for whatever they were getting out of it. No one was really listening to the priest give the sermon, where I was sitting there going, right, you've information, give me the answers, give me the information. I was looking for that kind of peace. So I think that kind of started a journey of asking questions. Now, a journey that I've veered far off at different occasions, but a journey that I came back to a few years ago when I had an opportunity to get out of the corporate world. And I was like, well, if I don't do this now, I'm never going to do it. And I knew I wasn't happy, and I knew I needed to explore this part of myself to find the truth of this. And I think getting into the coaching space, I don't think you can be a coach. And I've met people who do work as a coach in this way, but I don't think you can be a coach if you're not willing to do the work on yourself. I don't think you can do any of this kind of work, and any work where you're helping people change and grow and transform, if you're not willing to have done that work. So that you have to have experienced that change for yourself, so that you can then help people. You're not giving them your experience, but you're holding the space for them to have that experience that you understand to a certain degree. And so I think for me, Stephen, it's kind of that continuation of those questions that I've always kind of asked. And I've asked them in many ways, in many spaces over life. And I think I find myself here in this place. And my philosophy on coaching, now, I know the TED Talk was titled The Magic of Being Yourself, but my philosophy on coaching is coming home to yourself. And I didn't switch that into because I don't think from a TEDx title that would have been understood as easily. It's more understood in that coaching space, but I think that's kind of what it is. Most of our problems in life are because we're divorced from who we really are, because we struggle with either accepting parts of ourselves or we fight against these parts of ourselves. And the more we assimilate who we really are into what we are, then the easier life gets, or not more even the easier, the more natural life gets, I think is probably the truth of it. Gary.
Can please put your hands up, everyone else, if you've got questions and so on. Okay, so feel free, the room's open. My question, Mark, is talking about, put your hand down 1 minute. It's the question of like being authentic, going back to being authentic in communication. What does authentic mean? Opening ourselves, making ourselves vulnerable.
Yeah.
How much do we show of ourselves when we're in public? How authentic are you when you're doing your public speaking or when you're on stage? How open?
Look, that's a very good question. And I think there are certainly times when it can take a while to learn to be vulnerable, because being vulnerable is one of the most difficult things we do, because it means that we're exposed. It means that we can be attacked in our own mind in that way, because we're showing a part of ourselves that maybe we keep a little bit hidden, that we hide away from the world. But in order to communicate truly, we have to be allowed to be vulnerable. We have to allow ourselves the opportunity to grow. If we aren't vulnerable, if we are sitting here and we've got the walls down and there's no room for us to grow, then any exchange in communication is not coming from a point where we can learn. It's coming from a point where we're dictating. And that's not a good space to be in. It's quite a fixed space in that regard. Whereas we need to be able to allow ourselves to expose what needs to be exposed, but we have to be careful, because it has to be the right environment. You cannot go and reveal deepest, darkest secrets in a public space that you don't know people, or in an online space that you don't know people, unless this is a story you've long told. This is a story that you have healed from. This is a story that you own to the point where no one can use it against you because you own it so strongly. I was at an event about probably a year ago now, and it really struck me from a communication perspective. Two people spoke. One person spoke about going through some mental health challenges and how they were doing a lot of mindfulness work. And they spoke, it was quite open, and it was nice to hear them speak about it. It wasn't anything too much that a lot of people in the room couldn't resonate with to a certain extent. And he walked around the room and he could use the stage to its full extent. And in doing that, and he was quite, that was his energy. This lady spoke afterwards, and she spoke about going through extreme sexual assault at a young age, and how the life that made her, how she fell into a certain life because of that, and where she was now, and how she had grown through it. Now, this woman now works as a psychotherapist, and she never moved once. She stood stock still in the front of the room and spoke. And what she was doing she wasn't telling us a story. She was holding us in the room so we could hear the story she was trying to tell. And what she was really showing me was she was willing to be so open and so vulnerable. She had to hold us to hear her story. And I think that's a very extreme way of when you have the power to be vulnerable at that level, is you're actually holding the audience. We sometimes think that, we're there listening to the story, or the person's telling us a story. Sometimes the person is holding us as they're telling that story. Even on a one-to-one basis, you meet someone and they're telling you a very tough story. If they're the person revealing it to you and they're really hearing it from themselves for the first time, you're holding them in the space. If they're telling you the story so that you can learn from their story, they're holding you in that space. So it's interesting how vulnerability goes both ways in any conversation. And I want to bring it, when you talk about communication, I want to bring it even to home, right? So myself and my wife, we got married in a ceremony on Ireland's Hill of Tara, 16 years ago last week, and we had a very old style ceremony that we got married in. It was a kind of a shamanic ceremony, and we did a traditional tying of the hands, an actual tying of the hands together in the ceremony. And every year on our anniversary, we go up and we actually reenact the ceremony, and we sit down and we just have a conversation with each other where there is no judgment allowed whatsoever. It's just, this is what's going on for me. This is where I need more from you. And we just talk and talk it out. And no one can challenge. It's just a conversation where you're not allowed to judge the other person. And so we both get to be really vulnerable without having to worry about how the other person is going to react. Because the truth of most of our communication on a one-to-one basis is the other person is not thinking about what you've said. They're thinking, how does this affect me? And that's the real challenge, is to get past the how does this affect me. So I think from a vulnerability perspective, if you can find that space that it's safe to be vulnerable, well, that's a space that you need to use to explore your vulnerability. If you have a space where it's quite safe to be vulnerable and you're not exploring your vulnerability, what are you holding back from? What are you afraid of in that space?
I think Sean's put something in the chat, Mark. Let me just have a look at that for 1 minute. He says, I love how Brené Brown says its vulnerability is not about winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up even when you can't control the outcome. But how often can we control the outcome would be my question anyway. But
well, the opposite of vulnerability is our attempts to control the outcome. That's what it is. It's the shame cycle, and we're so by deliberately not sharing, we're attempting to control the outcome in the situation. We're like, no way, I'm in control here. I'm not revealing that. I have the pleasure of doing talks on vulnerability for men in particular, and I always find it, first of all, if it's a company that organizes the talk, very few people turn up, because men are not ready to sit there and be vulnerable. And we also are certainly not ready to sit there and be vulnerable in front of other men that we work with. So, there might be a company and there might be 200 men working in the company. I might get 11 men turn up for the particular talk. But when we have the conversation and we talk about vulnerability and we talk about the act of wearing a suit of armor, because that's what we're doing. Brené Brown's quote is so true there. Like, the opposite of what she's talking about is us wearing our suit of armor, sitting down there, we're in our suit of armor, we're here, we're protected. Safe. We're controlling the outcome because we're not willing to open up. We're not willing to be exposed. We're not willing to reveal any of ourselves. And if we don't reveal any of ourselves, well, then we're in control. Nothing can stop us. But it's a foolish idea that we're in control, because we're holding on to something that doesn't work. I wanted to include this when I was doing the TEDx talk, but I had an hour written, and as the person who was organizing said, you can't talk for an hour here. Come on, other people have to talk. So one part I wanted to do was, I had this impression, and I can do it physically, of like, you know, your ego is standing in front of you and the ego is here, and it's ready, whatever happens, it's ready to defend you at all costs. It's ready to hit whoever says something that might find offensive, that might cause me shame. It's ready. And I had this idea, if you just put your hand on my shoulder and just go, you know what, it's okay. I'm ready to handle this now. I can deal with this now. I can have this. You just get out of the way for a second, ego. Because that's what we all hide behind. We all hide behind this ego of how good we are and how we are. And that's what holds us back. And that's what keeps us hold us back. That idea of vulnerability, like, you know, people talk about the shame cycle, and people go, oh, it's a, you know, it's weak to be vulnerable. It takes courage to be vulnerable. So how can courage be weakness?
Yeah, it does take courage to be vulnerable. Any thoughts on this, David, Murray, Steve's already spoken. David?
Yeah, a couple of things. One, when you're talking about Toastmasters, I usually like either Raisin Bran or Pumpernickel toast. But so I had one employee looking for me. I always look for I look for mentees so I can mentor them to take over my role. And I had one guy, I thought I saw all kinds of promise in him and everything, but he was real quiet. And I finally convinced him to go to a Toastmasters. Did. And after that, he became more outspoken. He understood himself better and everything else. It was fantastic. So he started understanding what I was talking about and what you're talking about in leadership in particular. You had to be confident. You had to go forward and get others to understand. And on putting a smile on other people's faces, I just saw you laugh out loud a while ago. But anyway, I do that. And I took over a group of 78 designers. Designers are supposed to be very creative, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they weren't. They're just overgrown draftsmen, basically. So I had to bring their skill levels up to where they needed to be. So starting on day one, I was doing puns, or some people call them dad jokes.
Oh, terrible.
Oh, yeah. They were like deer caught in the headlights. They didn't know what was going on. And I explained, well, it's just a different way of thinking. And it's creative thought. And after they figured out I wasn't going anywhere, they all started trying to do puns and tried to do puns on me. And they were rough at first, but they kept getting better and better and better, and sometimes even trapping me on them. But anyway, the final result was our corporate global newsletter came out one quarter, and I had an article on my group, and it was talking about their greatly improved design creativity. And when they read that article, you just see their brains go, and they got it. They understood it. And,
So how did that, David, how did the creativity come out because of this intervention of yours with puns and dad jokes? How did that help them become more creative?
most people kind of walk around like little zombies, and they're afraid to say this, or they're afraid to say that. They're afraid to try this. They're afraid to try that. And on speaking, like you're talking about, you've got to be able to put yourself in a point where you can understand the people you're talking to. So you have to go deeper inside your mindset on how to communicate and various things like that. But when you do puns, they're silly, sometimes stupid. They're, like, why can't you hear pterodactyl go to the bathroom? Because the P is silent. It's spelled P-T-E-R. So you have those little silly things like that, and it puts a smile on someone's face. And when you put a smile on someone's face, it makes them feel good. And when you make people feel good, they're going to be more open to listening to what you have to say as well. And so it's silly. I mean, it sounds silly, a little joke or something like that, but it works.
Okay.
Anything you can do, put a smile on someone else's face and get them to understand, you're ahead of the ball game.
Brilliant. Okay, Dave, thank you. Stephen, you got your hand up, Stephen?
So my question is for Mark, and David created a just a beautiful example of the reflective nature of human exchange. And I practice hypnotherapy, and so I recognize we have this deep-seated reflection, right? So someone will do something, and then another person will mirror that same thing, and it's a way of making that connection. So, Mike, just kind of given the premise that this does exist, that if one person is angry, there is a tendency for another person to become angry in the same space, or if someone is calm, then another person will become calm in the same space. If we're talking about authenticity, what is some behavior, or what is some way of being that can in effect inspire or create this mirroring of authenticity?
I think one of the best ways to do that, like, we first of all, we're being ourselves. But I think to be truly authentic is to take an interest in others. Because to be authentic and only speak about yourself and to speak from yourself all the time, it's a little bit putting off for other people. And myself and Gary were talking earlier, and I was talking about, I met someone many, many years ago. This guy was like a shaman, a bit of a guru, and his level of authenticity struck me incredibly, because when I was speaking to him, you're speaking to him and he spoke to you, only to you. You were speaking to him and he was listening to you, and someone would come up to him and he'd go, just hold on a moment. And he would continue to speak to you in that way. And to be really authentic is to show someone that you're really listening and you really care and you're really paying attention to what they have. And then when you're really listening, because I think proper listening forms a part of authenticity, you're not listening to respond. You're listening to actually, sorry, you're not listening to then tell your story. You're listening to respond to what they have to say. So many people, you'll be telling them about having been on holiday in Palm Beach, and they're just waiting for you to finish the sentence so they can tell you at the time they were on holiday in Palm Beach. That's not a conversation. That's just an exchange of noise. But if you're really listening, you can actually respond to what the person is saying. And there's where the authenticity is, because you're actually responding to the person in front of you. You're being there in real time, in the real moment, and actually allowing them experience a conversation. So, you mentioned the phone there earlier, Stephen, as a sort of tool. Like, we're supposedly more in touch with people nowadays because we have this communication tool. But how much of our communication is actually real on this? How much of it is actually true communication, or how much of it is just exchange of noise and exchange of information all the time? And while exchange of information is a certain amount of communication, and we need to do it at home, how are you? What went on for you today? That's fair enough. But an awful lot of that really is feeling, it's emotion. How are you really? And when we're asking, how are you? What went on for you today? We're asking, how are you feeling? What's actually happening in your world? And we're taking that interest in somebody to do that. And there's authenticity in that all the time. So I feel a lot of authenticity is when we stop being self-interested and the interest begins to go out. Because I have never met another human being who wasn't interested. Everyone is fascinating. If you give them the chance to speak, give them the chance to be heard, they will always tell you something that is just going to blow your mind.
Actually, I was in London over the weekend. Just listen to this, and it was a beautiful Sunday, lovely weather, and there was a field. There was an open, like a lawn, and there were people all sitting sunbathing and drinking and chatting. And there was a girl, an Oriental-looking girl, sitting there with a sign next to her says, "Free to talk" or "free talk." She just had this sign there, and she was waiting for anyone to come up to her and just talk to her, sit down and talk to her. And I thought, wow. I said, when you see a sign like that, you're invited to go and talk to someone like that, because and there was a guy older than that much. I was sitting down, just having a chat, and I thought, wow, is this just human looking for connection? She just heard free talk or free speech or something like that, and people just go and sit down and talk to her. So it just really struck me, that message there. Sean's got his hand up, Mark. Give it, Sean. You've got an insight. Sorry. Hi, Lisa. Sean, you got your microphone off, on mute. Okay, that's better.
Yes, because the sun were around me talking, and I didn't want to unmute until I could step away. To start, I 100% agree with Mark's comment about every person is interesting. And as he was sharing that, I was thinking, like, I'm raising a 6-year-old boy, and he teaches me, I think, more than I teach him. But it's made me approach life with this childlike curiosity about people, about things. And I think that also serves well, as Mark was saying, in coaching. So, as a question, I would say, how has Mark adopted that? And like, how does he practice this curiosity? How does he spark his curiosity, keep it alive?
That's a great question, Sean, and I fully agree with you. It's so important for keep us young, keep us fresh, to be curious of the world around us, curious of the world that we live in. For me, in a multitude of ways, I would read so much, but I would never read the same type of book twice. I'd read something different. I'd be reading a book of poetry, I'd be reading a book of fiction, a book of non-fiction, a graphic novel, whatever it is, something different all the time. So I'm always sparking my brain in a different way. I'm always having conversations with different people. I'm always going to new places and different places, trying to experience new things. Always trying to be open about what now, not like there's times I know what I like as well, and I like to experience that. But I've learned very early on that if you close your mind to a potential, to something, you know what you're going to get out of it. It's going to be very fixed. But if you open up to something, you never know where it's going to come. And actually, I'll tell a story that Gary, you mentioned there about the person with the sign. Many years ago, Lisa, hi Lisa, good to see you. You might have heard this story before because I have a few travel tales that I tell sometimes. But many years ago, I was I was in Prague and in Vienna at the time, and I was busking. And just so you know, I have the least amount of music ability on the entire planet. I cannot sing. I cannot play an instrument. I have tried. I was in a band with a friend of mine, and he tried to teach me everything. Eventually, he gave me the triangle because he was like, "There's nothing you can do," and I couldn't even do that. He was like, "Well, you're rubbish." But so I went busking on the Charles Bridge in Prague, and what I did was I thought, what can I do? So I can speak. So I got a big sign, and I drew it out, and it said "Conversation for Sale." And I went busking, selling conversation on Charles Bridge, and I had all these different topics I could talk about, which were like, oh, if I think back, there was things like the economics of European integration. I was not long graduated with a degree in economics from university, and I had something to do with archaeology and different reasons. And the amount of people who stopped just to go, "What are you doing? Why are you doing this?"
Yeah.
And the conversations that I got out of it, and the curiosity. I remember one family, a German family, was walking past, and the father read the sign and he translated it. I could speak a little bit of German. I heard him translate it into German to the family, and they all laughed. And wasn't that just that little bit of interaction for me was brilliant. Look, at here I am telling a story about it many years later, because it just goes to show you when you're free like that, you can experience the world in a very different way. And it's that freedom of communication. There's curiosity right there, Sean, in it. Like I was curious to see what would happen, how it would happen. And everyone who came to me because they were curious about what the hell I was doing in that space.
Isn't that incredible that when we do these kind of things, we have stories to tell? I tell my children, I've got 3 children, when they ask me, shall I do this? I said, do it, because then you'll have something to talk about. Make that life so colorful that you're full of stories. So we were talking about storytelling, and I don't know what to say. I mean, geez, you live a life, you should have stories, hundreds of stories, hundreds of things that you just shared with us there. And I'm sure all of us have these kind of stories. It's putting ourselves out there, being vulnerable, feeling foolish, being laughed at, whatever it is, but then having that story to tell other people wherever we are. And that's what life is all about. It's just making those colorful connections. And so thanks for sharing, Mark. I think that's I've got a question for you. You're talking about, as David points out, making puns and dad jokes and so on. And you also mentioned that in your speeches, you like to be humorous. You think humor is part of communication. So my question is, when do we know how far we can go with humor in communication? And how do we know when we're not connected? Because sometimes you make a joke and it's just not, or you say a dad joke or a pun and it's not hit home. What happens then?
That's a good question. And I think some people, if people try to be funny and they're not funny, it doesn't work. And that can be very bad. And it comes across as forced, and it becomes cringy. So you got to be very careful. I could name a few professional comedians in that space as well, but I won't go there. But I think it's important that you like Bill Hicks is a great example. Does anyone remember that American comic Bill Hicks? He passed away in the early 90s. And Bill Hicks was a very, very serious man. And he would talk about very serious topics. And he'd finish this talk about a very serious topic and he'd go, I'm available for children's parties as well. And that was him just using that one bit of humor to break the entire tension so that he could pretend he was a comedian rather than speaking about serious topics. But it's a matter of learning the art of doing it, using it in your normal communication, not starting to try and use humor the first time you're speaking in front of a group, and practicing with one line. But if you try and throw in a joke that doesn't land, then you have a little line ready going, wow, the last time I tried that, the entire room burst out laughing. What's wrong with you people? You know, something to even add to breaking the tension a little bit more and to take it away from yourself. And one of the reasons why I use humor, I use it for two reasons. I think, Gary, is because I would say humor is something as a default for me because it makes me feel more comfortable. So we tend to do the things that make us feel more comfortable when we're speaking, when we're trying to communicate. And sometimes I use humor in desperately inappropriate situations and having one-on-one conversations at home with my wife would be terrible. I'll crack a joke. She goes, this is not the time for jokes. But, you know, when you're predisposed to that, it can cause problems. But it's just how I am. And I for me, it releases my tension to crack a joke as well. But I think there's also a need to understand what you're speaking about. There's times where humor doesn't work, and there's times when it does. And there's times when you can use dad jokes, or there's times when you can use soft and gentle humor, or times where you can be more blunt. It's a trial and error kind of thing. And you have to know your audience. Where I think it's really valuable is sometimes when we're given a talk, like let's say I'm talking about vulnerability for men, and I have to have a few jokes in it because the whole thing is so serious that, you know, if you keep people at a level of being this serious for the whole thing, you know, then, you know, without the bit of humor every so often as nearly a palate cleanser, and then you can go again. And that's where humor really comes in very useful. It's a very good palate cleanser for you allowing to get your message across because people need a reset every so often.
Marie, have you got any jokes you can share? No, no one knows a joke. When you ask that question,
No, I don't.
no, I'm terrible at telling. I never remember jokes.
I can't say that I'm good with jokes, but I can make people laugh with movement, dance, things like that. So my authentic self is more of a mover. So I can bring out joy and with people in that way. But using words, I get fumbled up. So
Well, you forget the pun. Let's say
yeah, I forget the yeah. So it's like I don't even try to to do jokes, but I do know that if I want somebody to laugh, I'll do some sort of movement, or I'll make a weird face or something. You know, it's usually I can go that route.
You know,
I was gonna say, I wanted to share a story. Just a quick one.
Go, Stephen. Tell us.
And this is a fellow coach, and she was sharing a story of her teenage daughter that brought a friend over, and he was from kind of an aristocratic family. So she's like, "Mom, don't embarrass me." And so she's having tea, right? And as she's drinking the tea, somebody says something funny, or even somebody makes a face. I can't remember what it was, but out comes the tea, right? And she's trying to tell this story of what's going on, and she's laughing so hard that she cannot get the story out, right? And so the more that she laughs, the more that I start laughing. And at that point, another friend of ours joins us, and both of us are laughing so hard. There's tears coming out of my eyes. She's laughing, I'm laughing. And now our third friend starts laughing without even knowing anything that's going on. And finally, when she catches a breath, she goes, "What are you laughing about?" And I go, "I don't know." I didn't know. I mean, it's like the story never got completely told, but it was that sharing of humor. And look, I mean, look at how even right now the energy is lifted in the space. I think that's that connection that we can have if we're in an authentic space of real humor and real joy. It's like that energy lifts up that space. And to me, it was just fascinating. But when the third person says, "What are you laughing about?" and I said, "I don't know," the three of us laughed, I think, for another 5 minutes.
There's a trust in it too, Stephen. You know, in when we laugh with people, we begin to trust. Because one of the things that we were talking about authenticity and that idea that we're afraid of being vulnerable because we're always trying to protect ourselves. But when we can laugh, then we can feel there's a connection there and there's a trust with a laugh because we don't feel rejected with a smile or with a laugh. And when we feel accepted, suddenly we can go. And Gary, when we were talking about having humor there as well, like I would use self-deprecating humor an awful lot, you know, because particularly I'm talking to an Irish audience or an English audience, and we do not like to be spoken down to. You have to be at the same level as them. If you try and speak down, you lose the audience immediately. We do not like gurus. And self-deprecating humor, when you make yourself kind of the laugh and you know the butt of the joke a little bit, it brings people alongside because they go, all right, well, you're just another Egypt like me, so we can all get along here together, you know. And I think that brings it down very easily.
Makes you it makes you approachable.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah,
I think that's a really important one. I was going to say, what about self-deprecating humor? Because I often thinking about international teams and talking to people from different cultures, because you have to be careful there. Something the humor doesn't translate or something. So yeah, quite often that's really important to sort of set the tone, isn't it? To say, I don't know everything about everything, and particularly maybe not the culture, all the cultural stuff. So I think that's a great point.
I just thought of something that I authentically do without even trying that causes laughter. I snort when I start laughing. And the more I laugh, the more I snort. And the more I snort, the more people laugh. And this is not something I do on purpose. And so I cannot control it. So I'll be in the middle of a conversation. All of a sudden I'll start laughing and I'll start. So that is something that is, I think, truly authentic to me because it's not something I can control. Or would even try to, actually.
That's lovely, Maria, and I appreciate the honesty in that, right? And there's one big thing about communication, and the word, Gary, you mentioned story earlier on, right? And most of our communication is story. That's how we communicate as humans, because we all come from oral culture somewhere back, that all the information was passed down through story. Like in Ireland, we have a lot of mythological culture, and the story was all about the rivers and the mountains and the sea. To understand all of these things, understand, like, you take Aboriginal culture in Australia, in their stories is where the watering holes are. You know, the English will have found a watering hole 50 years ago. The Aboriginals will have had a story about that, and it's buried under the ground. They've had a story for 10,000 years that it exists because it exists in story. And if you look at how we've communicated here and how we've opened up, we've told some stories. And through telling stories that involve a little bit of the truth of ourselves, a little bit of vulnerability, we become more open to each other and easier to understand each other because we are all built off story. From the very first moment of the day, we go, I am. There's the first story that we tell every day.
Yeah, definitely. I think the stories. The last point was just that I was going to mention the word, timing. If you're trying to be humorous, if you're trying to tell jokes, it's the timing is got to be very important. As you said, if you're having a discussion with your wife and you're coming out with a one-liner, probably is not the best moment to do that. However, if you've got an audience that's like resonating with what you're saying, it's quite easy to stop and come out with a joke. I listened to a guy called Sadhguru. I don't know if you know this. He's an Indian spiritual guide, and he comes up with some great one-liners, but he's in the middle of a conversation and he's got everyone's attention, like holding the audience, and he's able to break away from what he's talking, and he says, let me tell you a short story, and he brings it in so casually into the conversation that you don't know that he's actually about to make a joke. And then he goes back to his speech, and he's just thrown those little stories in there. It just makes it so richer, and you want to listen to him because the stories are all connected. He's a great storyteller. I think that's communication, really. Yeah. So we're coming to the end. We're coming to the end already. I know the time has flown by.
Yeah.
Mark, thank you very much for being here, for being our co-host, guest speaker. Sorry I was late, but I couldn't cancel that doctor's appointment. It was now or 3 weeks' time, so I take it on. Thank you all for being here. It's really good to see you. And next week, I've invited a German coach. He speaks English, don't worry. He's from Germany. and he's going to be speaking about interconnectedness, because he works with a lot of Ukraine immigrants who've come to Germany, and they're trying to integrate into the society there with the language, the culture, the religion, all the difficulties. And so he's going to talk to us about how important that is, the interconnectedness between different nationalities, but between people. And so if you're free and you want to come along next Tuesday from 5 to 6 p.m. CET, Central European Time, good to see you. If not, have a great day. The recording is going to be on the YouTube channel, so if you want to watch it again, go over there. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, all. Nice to be here.
Yes, bye.
See you, all.
Bye, 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 Lisa, Sean, everyone. David, Stephen.
Thanks, everyone.
William, Murray.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.